The Sterling Proposal. Part 1. The Arrangement. Serafina Sterling did not believe in fairy tales. She believed in contracts, in strategic acquisitions, and in the beautiful, silent obedience of the stock market. At 52, she was the architect of her own empire, a formidable figure in the world of modern art and real estate. Her penthouse apartment was a testament to her success. It was a museum of glass and steel overlooking the city, filled with priceless sculptures and paintings. But at night, the silence in the vast, perfect rooms was louder than any alarm. It was the sound of profound, unshakable loneliness. 2 years ago, that silence had been broken by Julian. He was 28, a musician with a fire in his eyes and a talent that was raw, brilliant, and completely unrecognized. She had discovered him playing a classical guitar in a small, crowded cafe she had entered only to escape the rain. His music was not just skilled, it was full of a desperate, beautiful emotion that she recognized in herself. Their relationship began as a simple arrangement, a contract, just like any other in her life. She became his patron. She gave him a beautiful studio to work in, bought him a world-class guitar, and paid for his living expenses so he could create music without worry. In return, he filled her silent world with life. He brought music, laughter, and passionate conversation into her home. He wasn't just an employee or a project. He was the color that had been missing from her black and white world. She was his sugar mommy. At first, the term had made her feel cheap, as if she were buying affection. But she was a practical woman. What was the difference between funding a promising artist and funding a promising tech startup? Both were investments. Julian, however, made it feel like much more than a transaction. He listened to her, he challenged her opinions, and he looked at her not as a CEO or a bank account, but as Serafina. He made her feel beautiful, not just powerful. The comfortable lines of their arrangement blurred and then disappeared completely. They became a couple, their lives intertwined. The city whispered about them. They were the subject of gossip at every charity gala and society dinner. She saw the looks, a mix of envy, pity, and disdain. "He's young enough to be her son," they would whisper behind their champagne glasses. "He's just waiting for his inheritance." Serafina ignored them. She was strong enough to be above gossip. But late at night, the whispers would sometimes echo in her own mind. Then, one evening, everything changed. They were having dinner on her terrace, the city lights twinkling below them like a carpet of fallen stars. Julian was quiet, his eyes serious. He put down his fork, took her hand, and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Serafina," he said, his voice steady, "I know how this started. I know what people say. But what I feel for you is the most real thing in my life. I don't want to be your arrangement anymore. I want to be your husband. Will you marry me?" He opened a small velvet box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. It was not a giant, flashy diamond, but a modest, tasteful band. It was a ring chosen by a man who knew her taste, not by a man trying to spend her money. Serafina stared at the ring, and then at the hopeful, nervous face of the man she loved. For the first time in her life, the powerful, decisive Serafina Sterling had no idea what to do. The proposal was not the end of a fairy tale. It was the beginning of her biggest and most terrifying risk. Part 2. The Whispers of Doubt. The word yes was on the tip of her tongue, but it refused to come out. Instead, she whispered, "Julian, I need some time to think." He hid his disappointment well, but she saw it in the slight fall of his shoulders. Of course," he said, managing a smile. It's a lot to ask. Take all the time you need." The days that followed were a special kind of torture for Serafina. The proposal had changed the air between them. It was no longer a comfortable partnership. It was a question that hung in every room. Serafina found herself analyzing his every move. When he kissed her, was it for love or for security? When he said, "I love you," was it a declaration or a negotiation? Her closest friend, a sharp-witted woman named Beatrice, met for lunch at a horribly expensive restaurant. "A proposal?" Beatrice said, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Darling, are you serious? He's a child. A very charming and handsome child, I'll give you that. But he's proposing to your portfolio, not your personality. You must see that." "It's not like that," Serafina argued, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Beatrice countered. "You built your entire life on being smart, on never letting emotion cloud your judgment. Don't become a fool now. A prenuptial agreement is not enough. The moment you say, 'I do,' you are no longer his patron. You are his prize." Beatrice's words were like poison, feeding a fear that was already growing in her heart. The external whispers were now an internal storm. A few nights later, they attended a gallery opening. It was her world, full of people she knew. Julian, dressed in a tuxedo she had bought for him, looked handsome but slightly out of place. She watched as one of her business rivals, a man named Marcus Thorne, cornered Julian. She was too far away to hear, but she could read the scene perfectly. I saw Marcus's smug smile and Julian's polite but uncomfortable expression. I saw Marcus clap Julian on the shoulder, a gesture that was both friendly and demeaning. Later, she asked Julian what Marcus had said. Julian hesitated. "It was nothing, just stupid small talk." "Tell me, Julian," she insisted. He sighed. "He congratulated me. He said I was the smartest young man in the city for having secured the Sterling fortune. He was being a jerk." The words hit Serafina harder than she expected. It wasn't Julian's fault, but hearing the ugly gossip spoken aloud made it feel more real. I saw a flicker of shame in Julian's eyes, and it broke my heart. Was this what his life would be like as her husband? Defending his love, constantly being seen as a gold digger? That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked through her silent, perfect apartment. Her life was a fortress she had built to protect herself. Marrying Julian felt like lowering the bridge and inviting in a man who might be a loving king or a conquering enemy. And for the first time, she was terrified that she wouldn't know which one he was until it was too late. She needed to know for sure. Part 3. The test. She knew she could not live with this uncertainty. A marriage built on doubt would crumble. She needed to know if Julian's love was strong enough to survive without her money. So, she devised a plan. It was a calculated risk, a cold and strategic move from her old life as a CEO. It felt cruel, but she felt it was necessary. She was going to stage a disaster. She was going to tell Julian she had lost everything. She spent 2 days preparing. She had her lawyer drop fake documents. She practiced her speech, her tone, the look of despair on her face. It was the most important performance of her life. She chose a Sunday morning. There were no meetings, no calls, no distractions. She made coffee, her hands shaking slightly. She found Julian in his studio, working on a new piece of music. The melody was beautiful, full of hope and longing. It almost made her stop. "Julian." I began. She began, her voice carefully controlled to sound broken. "Can we talk?" He immediately put down his guitar, his face filled with concern. "Of course. What's wrong? You look pale." They sat on the sofa, the city skyline spread out before them. She took a deep breath. There's no easy way to say this, she started, looking at her hands. There was a deal, a very large international real estate deal. I invested heavily. It was supposed to be the biggest success of my career. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. There was fraud, a market crash in Asia. It doesn't matter. The point is, the money is gone. Almost all of it.
She finally dared to look at him. The penthouse, Julian, we have to sell it. The cars, the art, it's all going to be sold. My company is facing bankruptcy. I have lost everything. She held her breath, watching him. This was the moment of truth. She expected shock, maybe fear. She braced herself for the look of panic, the quiet calculation in his eyes as he realized the life he knew was over. She prepared for the awkward, gentle excuses he would make before he eventually left. Julian was silent for a long time. He stared out the window, and Serafina's heart sank. This was it. He was processing the end of his comfortable life. But when he finally turned to her, his eyes were not filled with panic or disappointment. They were filled with a deep, unwavering compassion. He reached out and took her hands. They were cold, and he held them tightly in his own warm grip. "Okay," he said softly. Serafina was stunned. "Okay?" she repeated, confused. "Okay," he said again, his voice firm. "So we sell the apartment. I never liked that weird sculpture in the hallway anyway. So we have less money. So what? Serafina, look at me." He waited until her eyes met his. "Did you think that's what this was about?" he asked, a hint of hurt in his voice. "The penthouse? The fancy dinners? I was playing guitar in a dirty cafe when you met me. I was happy then because I had my music. The only thing that has truly changed my life for the better since then is you." He moved closer. "We'll be fine," he said with absolute certainty. "I can get a job. I can teach guitar. I can go back to playing in cafes. We'll rent a small apartment. As long as I have you, I don't care where we live. We will figure it out. Together." Part 4. The Real Proposal. Tears began to stream down Serafina's face. They were not tears of sadness, but tears of overwhelming, cleansing relief. The dam of fear and suspicion that she had built inside her heart finally broke. He hadn't flinched. He hadn't hesitated. He had seen the end of a life of luxury and had only reached for her hand. "It's not true," she whispered through her tears. Julian looked confused. "What's not true?" "The money," she confessed, her voice choked with emotion. "It's not gone. The deal was a success. Everything is fine. It was a test." She watched his face change. The compassion was replaced by a complex mix of emotions: confusion, then hurt, and then a deep, quiet anger. He let go of her hands and stood up. "A test?" he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You lied to me? You pretended you were ruined just to see what I would do?" "I had to know," she pleaded, standing up to face him. "Julian, can you understand the whispers, my friends, my own fears? I was so scared that you loved what I could give you, not who I am." "And what did you think I would do?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. "Did you think I would pack my bags and run? After 2 years? You thought so little of me. You thought so little of us." The pain in his voice was real. She had protected her heart, but she had wounded his. "It wasn't about you. It was about me," she said desperately. "I have spent my whole life protecting myself. I don't know how to trust so completely. It was a terrible, horrible thing to do, and I am so sorry. But I saw my future in your eyes, and I was terrified it was a mirage." He was silent, looking at her. She could see the battle inside him, his hurt pride versus his love for her. Finally, he let out a long breath, and the anger seemed to drain away, leaving only a deep sadness. My love for you was never a test, Serafina. It was a fact. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. That proposal, it wasn't about securing a fortune, he said quietly. It was about wanting to be your partner, not your project, your equal. I wanted to build a real life with you, no matter what that looked like. He turned back to her, and his eyes were clear. So let me ask again, he said, his voice soft but strong. Forget the penthouse, forget the money, forget everything else. Serafina Sterling, will you build a small, simple, complicated, wonderful life with me? Will you marry me? This time there was no hesitation. The question was not about a ring or a fortune. It was about a future. Her walls were gone, her doubts erased. All that was left was the truth of his love and the certainty in her own heart. Yes, she said, a real, brilliant smile spreading across her face. Yes, I will. The Sterling Proposal continued. Part 5. The Prenuptial Paradox. The initial joy of their engagement was pure and bright, but the shadow of Serafina's test lingered. The lie, even though it had led to a truthful moment, was a scar. A few days later, as they sat in the now joyful silence of her living room, Julian turned to her. He was not angry, but his eyes were serious. "We need to talk about the test, Serafina," he said quietly. "I've forgiven you, and I meant what I said, but I need to understand. The woman I'm going to marry, she has to trust me. I need to know that you are marrying me, not just agreeing to a merger where you still hold all the control." Serafina's heart ached with shame, but she knew he was right. This was a necessary conversation. "I am so sorry, Julian," she said, her voice full of sincere regret. "It came from a place of fear. For my entire adult life, every relationship was a transaction. People wanted something from me. I built walls to protect myself, and I didn't know how to take them down. The test was, it was the last brick in that wall. When you didn't leave, you shattered the whole thing. I'm not that woman anymore. You've changed me." As if on cue, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies, who had managed her legal affairs for 20 years. The message was short and clear. "Serafina, we need to meet immediately to draft the prenuptial agreement." Serafina showed the message to Julian. His face tightened. A prenup, a contract signed before marriage, detailing how assets will be divided if the marriage ends. For a woman of Serafina's wealth, it was standard procedure. It was logical. It was smart. But coming after her test, it felt like another act of profound distrust. She saw the look on his face, and she made a decision. She was done with the old rules. She said, "This is our first decision as an engaged couple. My lawyer, my board of directors, my entire past life would tell me to create an ironclad contract that protects every penny. But I am not asking them. I am asking you. What should we do?" Julian was silent for a moment, surprised by her question. He was not being told what to do. He was being asked to be a partner. Finally, he spoke. "A prenup is a plan for failure, and I am not planning to fail. But I also understand your world, so let's make them a contract they can't argue with." "What do you mean?" Serafina asked. "I will sign a prenuptial agreement, but I will write the most important clause, and it will only have one sentence." The next day, they met with the stern and humorless Mr. Davies. The lawyer presented a thick document full of legal language and financial terms. Julian pushed it aside. He handed Mr. Davies a single piece of paper. On it, he had written, "In the event of a divorce, Julian Croft will receive nothing of Serafina Sterling's fortune created before the marriage. He will receive only one thing, the classical guitar she purchased for him when they first met." Mr. Davies stared at the paper, speechless. He clearly thought Julian was a fool, but Serafina understood. The guitar was a symbol of the beginning of their relationship. It was a symbol of her belief in his art, not his value as a husband. By asking only for that, Julian was making a powerful statement. He was proving that he wanted her, not her wealth. He was ending the whispers forever. Serafina reached across the table and put her hand on top of his. That, she said to her stunned lawyer, is the only clause that matters. Put it in the contract. In that moment, they were not a rich woman and a young artist. They were a team. Part 6. The Wedding in the Woods. With the prenuptial agreement settled, the question of the wedding arose. Serafina's friend Beatrice was already planning a massive society event. It must be at the Grand Ballroom, Beatrice declared over the phone. We'll have an orchestra, 1,000 guests, reporters. We have to show the world that this is a serious union, a joining of power. Serafina hung up the phone and looked at Julian. They both knew that a huge, flashy wedding was the last thing they wanted. It would be a performance for the very people who had gossiped about them. It would be about money and status, the two things they were trying to escape. I have an idea, Julian said. My family lives in a small town a few hours away called Northwood. It's quiet. It's surrounded by an old forest. We could get married there. Not for anyone, just for us. Serafina's face lit up. The thought of escaping the city, of making their vows in a place that was simple and real, felt perfect. It was a statement that their marriage was about nature and peace, not concrete and commerce. They drove to Northwood the next weekend. It was the complete opposite of her life. The roads were narrow, the houses were made of wood, and everyone seemed to know each other. Julian's family, his mother, a kind schoolteacher, and his father, a cheerful carpenter, welcomed Serafina with open arms. They were not impressed by her fame or her wealth. They were happy because their son was happy. For the first time, she felt like she was part of a real family. They decided to have the ceremony in a clearing in the woods that Julian had loved as a child. There was no ballroom, only a cathedral of tall trees. There was no orchestra, only the sound of the wind and the birds. The wedding day was cool and sunny. Serafina did not wear a big, expensive designer gown. She wore a simple, elegant cream-colored dress. Julian wore a simple suit. The guests were not 1,000 high society figures. There were only 20 people. Julian's family, Serafina's loyal assistant, and her old, wise friend Beatrice, who, after much argument, had finally understood and came with tears in her eyes. They wrote their own vows. When it was Julian's turn, he looked at her. I promise to fill your silent rooms with music, he said. I promise to see the woman, not the CEO. I promise to be your partner, not your project. My love for you is not a contract. It is my truth. When it was Serafina's turn, she took his hands. I promise to trust your love, she said, her voice full of emotion. I promise to tear down any new walls I might try to build. You were the color in my black and white world, and I promise to build a life with you that is full of every color we can imagine. My home is no longer a penthouse. It is wherever you are. As they exchanged rings under the canopy of leaves, Serafina Sterling knew she had never made a better acquisition. She hadn't bought a husband or purchased affection. She had let go of her fear, and in return, she had received the one thing her money could never buy, a love that was real and a partner who was truly her equal. The story was no longer about a sugar mommy and her younger lover. It was simply about a man and a woman who were building a life together on their own terms.
The Sterling proposal continued. Part 7. A Clash of Worlds. Returning to the city after the quiet magic of their wedding in the woods was like diving into ice-cold water. The peace and simplicity of Northwood were replaced by the relentless hum of business and the bright glare of public life. Serafina, now Serafina Sterling Croft, had hoped their small, private wedding would signal a change to the world, but the world wasn't ready to listen. Their first public appearance as a married couple was a mandatory charity gala for the city's art museum,
a major institution that Serafina had supported for years. As they walked in, the familiar whispers started again, but with a new edge. They weren't just the scandalous couple anymore. They were a married mystery. A wealthy investor, a man Serafina had known for years, approached them with a wide, insincere smile. "Serafina, congratulations," he boomed. Then he turned to Julian, clapping him on the shoulder in that same demeaning way Marcus Thorne had before. "And you, Julian, you've done it. You played the long game and won the ultimate prize. Tell me, what's the secret?" Before Serafina could deliver a cold, sharp reply, Julian answered himself. He didn't get angry. He simply smiled a calm, easy smile. "The secret," Julian replied, his voice clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I learned to play the guitar. It seems to have worked out pretty well." The investor was left speechless, unsure if he was being knocked or not. Julian gently took Serafina's hand and led her away, leaving the man looking foolish. Serafina felt a surge of pride. Julian wasn't just defending himself, he was controlling the narrative with grace and humor. However, the challenges were not just external, they came from within their own home. Serafina was used to a life of rigid schedules and absolute control. Her days were planned to the minute. Julian's life was one of creative chaos. He found inspiration at 3 a.m. He would get lost in a piece of music for hours, forgetting about meals, appointments, and the world outside. One afternoon, Serafina came home from a series of incredibly stressful meetings. She had battled with her board of directors over a risky new venture and needed peace. She walked into the penthouse expecting silence, but was met with a wall of sound. Julian was in the living room with 3 other musicians, a cellist, a violinist, and a drummer. They were loudly and passionately workshopping a new experimental piece of music. Papers were scattered everywhere, and empty coffee cups sat on a priceless antique table. "Julian, what is this?" Serafina demanded, her voice sharp with exhaustion and stress. "I have a headache that could split a mountain, and my home sounds like a rock concert." The music stopped. The other musicians looked incredibly awkward. Julian's face fell. "We were just creating," he said. "I didn't know you were coming home so early." "This is my home. It's not a public rehearsal studio." She snapped. The words hurt him. She could see it instantly. She was treating him like an employee who had broken a rule, not a husband who lived there. The silence that followed was more painful than the loud music had been. The musicians packed up and left quickly. Later that evening, the tension was thick between them. "I'm sorry," Serafina said finally, sitting next to him on the sofa. "I wasn't fair. After a day of fighting for control at the office, I came home and tried to control you too. It's an old bad habit." Julian looked at her. "And I'm sorry," he replied. "I forget that this space is your sanctuary, your place to find peace. I should have been more considerate. We need to find a balance between your silence and my sound." It was a turning point. They realized their marriage wasn't about one person changing for the other. It was about creating a new world together, one that had space for both a powerful CEO and a creative musician. The next day, Serafina commissioned a team of architects, not to build a new office, but to soundproof Julian's studio perfectly. It was a practical solution, but also a symbol. She was making a permanent structural space for his world within hers. Part 8. The Northwood Investment. A few months later, Julian's father called with bad news. The old lumber mill in Northwood, the town's largest employer for over a century, was closing down. The national corporation that owned it was moving its operations overseas. For the small town, it was a catastrophe. Hundreds of people, including many of Julian's childhood friends and neighbors, would lose their jobs. The town itself was at risk of dying. Julian was devastated. He felt helpless watching his hometown suffer from so far away. He talked about it with Serafina, his voice full of sadness. "These are good people," he said. "They've worked there their whole lives just like their parents did. They don't have other options. The town's economy is built around that mill. Serafina listened intently. In the past, she would have seen this as a sad but distant problem, a simple headline about market forces. But now, it was personal. These were the people who had welcomed her into their family without judgment. Northwood was no longer just a place on a map, it was a part of her story. She spent the next week making quiet phone calls. She had her top analysts run numbers and create reports. She studied the mill's assets, its production capacity, and the market for local timber. She was moving with the silent, deadly precision of a corporate predator. One evening, she came to Julian and laid a thick folder on the table. "What's this?" he asked. "It's a business plan," she simply said. "I'm buying the Northwood Mill." Julian stared at her. "You're what?" "Serafina, the mill is failing. That's why the corporation is closing it. It's a bad investment." "It's a bad investment for a massive corporation that only cares about maximizing profit," she corrected. "They were using outdated equipment and a terrible business model. My team has found a way. We can modernize the equipment, focus on sustainable forestry, and partner with high-end furniture makers. We can not only save the mill, but we can make it profitable. More importantly," she looked at him, "we can make it employee-owned within 10 years." He was speechless. She wasn't just throwing money at a problem. She had used her formidable skills, her power and intelligence, not just for profit, but for people, for his people. "But this is a huge risk," Julian said. "You'd be risking your own money, your reputation, on my hometown." "Exactly," Serafina said. "When I was afraid, you were willing to give up everything for me. You were ready to live in a small apartment and teach guitar to support us. You invested everything you had in me. Now, I'm investing in us, our family, our community. This isn't a gift, Julian. It's a partnership. But I need your help. I know business, but you know the people. We do this together, or we don't do it at all." A huge smile broke across Julian's face. He finally understood. This was their new life. It was a fusion of their strengths, her powerful business and his human connection, her capital and his community. The story had found its final chapter. It was no longer about a rich woman and a young man. It was about a power couple in the truest sense of the word. They were partners who were building not just a marriage, but a better world around them, proving that the greatest love stories are not about what people receive, but about what they choose to build together.